Hello, everyone. My name is Aleš Šteger. I'm a poet, a Griffin trustee, and I have this wonderful opportunity to get a bit in conversation with Emily Riddle. Emily received the Griffin Award for the Canadian First Book for her book, The Big Melt. Congratulations, Emily.
Thank
It's
you.
it's wonderful having you here in this format, and I'm truly looking forward also to see you in Toronto on June 7th, when the prizes will be handed over and when you'll give a poetry prize reading. I'm really very much looking forward. So the big melt, a big door is opening, and
Yes.
you enter the world of poetry. And the first poetry collection is always a very special act and event. And in this respect, I thought if you could tell me and everyone listening a bit about the how this book was coming into being. What were the worst obstacles and dilemmas that you had in writing it? And most of all, how looked this process of finding a proper language
Hmm.
for this book coming into being?
This book actually began when I was living up north, going to a program called Dechinta. And so I was taking a creative writing class with Richard Van Camp, who's a Dene writer who lives here in Edmonton. And I wrote a long form poem, almost as frustration as a nonfiction writer or someone who's doing more journalistic work. And it also came out of a kind of frustration of working in Indigenous policy in Canada and negotiating with the provincial and federal governments and feeling frustrated about not being able to imagine a different world through that form of writing, whether it was policy or journalism work. So feeling very free in a poetic format to think about a world otherwise and analyze my family's place on our own territory, coming home, non-linearity of time, and kind of our own nihio thought, which I think really lends well to poetic form too.
Uh, the word "big" is a key word in the book. I mean, it's there are four chapters in the book, all entitled to the big bell, the big prayer, the big kinship, big horizon. On the other hand, the opposition, the small, the fragile, the how shall I say, private, is essential narrative in the book as I read it. Can you tell us a bit more about this opposition, big and small?
The word big is kind of a play on language for Cree speakers or people that speak Nihio. We have lots of different words for big, but one of them is use mistahe, which actually means like big or a lot of. So the kind of
Yes.
concept of big in our language is quite a bit different. And so that is a bit of a play on that word of thinking about like a lot of or big, and that how that relates to our culture, thinking differently of lots of things and how it manifests. But I do really like that analysis of the small and kind of intimate too, because that's sort of analysis of everyday life, of not always being like a noble Indigenous person who's always wearing regalia, but someone who is doing dishes and like living in these colonial structures in an everyday way, and how that kind of living within this colonial structure in beautiful ways in our own kinship is also small, but a way of living out that kind of big kinship too. I like that. Yeah.
Kinship, I mean, the book is built around questions of identity, I would say, and I mean, personal and communal identity and history. Now, how important do you think it is for a reader to know where you come from, where your linguistic and cultural background is. And I see it now really from the perspective of someone from Ljubljana in Europe, to read your book and to enjoy it a lot and to learn also a lot through it. But when you were writing it, did you had in mind a specific community or a circle of people for whom you write, or was it just let's say writing for the sea breezes, as Apollinaire, the French poet, said once about what he was doing?
I think I write for everyone, but there are specific kind of cultural tidbits that you'll definitely understand if you're specifically Plains Cree or if you're from the prairies and what's now called Canada. And there are like small linguistic clues, definitely, like the book is majority in English, but there are things you will understand if you know even a conversational amount of Nihio. So I think I write for everyone, but I definitely leave tidbits for Nihioak and people from my own nation. And I think it's really important, yeah, that I'm clear about where I come from and those kind of kinship connections too, because they influence my writing and my relationship to people and community and that sort of thing too. And also because I know Gregory Schofield was one of the judges this year for the Griffin Poetry Prize, and his book was his memoir was one of the first books I read by an Indigenous author. So even just in my early 30s, thinking about like there weren't books available for me to read as a teenager to the same extent. So I think for youth to be able to see themselves represented in literature in Canada, Indigenous youth, is also really important.
Were they already reactions from the side of your community to the book? People reacting, reading it, and responding to it?
I think so, yeah. It's always good to get a kind of check mark from elders or knowledge keepers, we'd call them in our community, that the cultural components that I've included are both accurate but not revealing too much. That was some of the difficulty in writing this book, was deciding how personal to be, and then also not revealing kind of cultural or ceremonial knowledge that we keep like internally for our community too. So it has been really gratifying to see reaction from community, and just to live in a community of poets that are Cree, that are working in Canada too.
Among the sentences written by the judges is this one I like very much. If there is a trail back to our ancestors and forward to ourselves, these poems call us to be still and to listen to a new generation of storytellers. Now, the storytelling is something that is extremely strong in this book, that comes over. Also, the way you do it, it reveals someone at work who is in great, how shall I say, freedom with what one does, and this comes over very well in the book. Story on one side, musicality on the other. Do you see there direct traces to, let's say, your Indigenous background, or is this something that is coming more from readers' experience in general?
I think for freedom is kind of one of our core values that we have in our culture. There's like kind of 7 pillars that are related to those rainbow colors that I talk about in that book.
Yes.
And freedom is one of those. And so freedom being like, we have ability to make our own choices. We don't believe in destiny. So, and at the same time, we are really communal people that all share with each other. So we really believe in autonomy of an individual and bodies and be able to make choices. And also that, so freedom is something that I grew up with thinking about, and how that relates to responsibility too. And then in terms of musicality, I'm not a musician. I used to play saxophone very badly.
Oh, you did? Bravo.
But sound is really important to us. Like we believe like sound is part of the universe and part of like witnessing. So being able to speak words has like witnessed by creation and everyone. So we believe that the universe is actually made out of sound. So I think there's a responsibility in terms of what sound you share with the universe too. And and how, if people are going to read your poems out loud, what you put out into the world for people to consume.
As I said, you will read on the June 7th in Toronto, and I would like to invite everyone to come. I would like to thank you for this rather short conversation, and we agreed to end with the sound of the universe of your poems. So please, if you could read one poem you prepared.
Thank you so much. I'd like to read Cree Girl Explodes, a political project called Alberta. And this is after Billy Ray Belcourt's Cree Girl Explodes the Necropolis of Ottawa. So Billy is a previous Griffin Poetry Prize winner and one of my close friends. And we're dealing with the worst air quality in the world right now in Alberta with all the forest fires and a provincial election as well. So it seems like a fitting poem of this week. So I stare at the sandstone dome of the Alberta legislature so long that it started to disintegrate. It seemed to be doing that on its own, how this temple of democracy was covered in tarps during maintenance. But this time, the sedimentary grandfathers squished into the symbol of occupation were fully revolting. The beavers were alerted from their metropolis to the west and filed in to dismantle the wooden furniture and fixtures. They spared the Quaggle totem pole on the grounds and called upon horse relatives to carry it back to the west coast. The nearby magpies giggled to themselves, feasting on the snacks of overpaid political staffers. Once the building had returned to the earth, the last iteration of Louise's Fort Edmonton mansion emerged from the lawn bowling green. She wrote emails from the dead to each of her descendants. None of us questioned this because our ancestors had powers beyond emails. We had learned that the only way to survive climate upheaval was to accept the non-linearity of time and realms. We had not figured out how to communicate across those borders, but opening ourselves to it was half the battle. All of Louise's descendants who were single moms moved into her house and built other houses on the grounds of the non-existent Alberta legislature. There was no chief factor, there was no premier, there were only Gitchitaw, Squaywak, and those who understood their authority.
Thank you very much, Emily. I'm looking forward to see you again, and I would like to welcome everyone to come and to buy and read your wonderful Big Melt. Thank you.
Thank you.